"Mom, you're embarrassing yourself. Just sit down and let us handle this. You don't understand how the world works anymore." Those words came from my own daughter's mouth, right there at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with homework, where she'd cried over her first heartbreak, where I'd sat with her through 2 miscarriages and held her hand through both. My son was beside her, nodding along like he always did when his sister was in charge. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that I had already spent the entire previous afternoon on the phone with my attorney. By Friday morning, when my daughter reached for the credit card I had been paying for 22 years, the one I added her to after her divorce, because she needed help getting back on her feet, it declined. She tried again, declined. A third time, declined. And that was only the beginning. My name is Dorothy Caldwell. I am 67 years old, and I live in Savannah, Georgia, in a craftsman house on a quiet street lined with live oaks. I bought that house with my husband Frank in 1993 for $112,000. Frank passed away from pancreatic cancer 14 months ago after a 6-month fight that was the hardest thing I have ever witnessed in my life. We had been married for 41 years. Before I tell you everything that happened, I want to say something. Drop your city or state in the comments. I want to know you're out there, because what I went through made me feel more alone than I had ever felt in my life, and I suspect some of you have felt that same loneliness. That particular kind where the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones making you feel smallest. Frank was a high school football coach for 34 years, and I was a registered nurse for 30 years before I retired at 62. We were not wealthy people. We were comfortable, careful, hard-working people. We drove our cars until they had 150,000 miles on them. We brought our lunches to work. We said no to things we wanted so we could say yes to things that mattered. When Frank died, the house was paid off. We had a combined retirement savings of about $380,000, a life insurance policy that paid out $175,000, and a small rental property, a 2-bedroom cottage about 4 miles away that we'd bought 15 years ago and had been renting out ever since. Not millions of dollars, not a fortune, but enough. More than enough for a 6-7-year-old woman to live comfortably and with dignity for the rest of her life. I have 2 children. My daughter Karen is 44. She works in pharmaceutical sales, makes good money, and has been divorced for 5 years from a man who wasn't kind to her. She has 2 daughters, ages 9 and 12. My son Brian is 41. He works in construction management and is married to a woman named Tanya, who does bookkeeping part-time and considers herself a very serious home chef. They have a 10-year-old son. Both of my children live within 20 minutes of me. When Frank was sick, they were wonderful. Karen drove him to chemo appointments. Brian fixed the wheelchair ramp when Frank could no longer manage the front steps. They were present, attentive. And for those 6 months, I was reminded of every good thing I had ever seen in them. When Frank died, they were there. When I couldn't get off the floor the first 3 mornings, Karen slept on my couch. I will always be grateful for that. But grief has a way of changing things, and money has a way of revealing things. It started about 4 months after Frank's funeral. I had decided to redo the guest bathroom. It was outdated. The grout was molding. The fixtures were 30 years old. I hired a contractor, picked out some clean white subway tile, a new vanity, decent fixtures. The whole job came to $8,400. I paid for it in cash from my savings and felt good about it. I had spent 30 years taking care of other people. I could take care of my own house. Karen came over while the contractor was still finishing up and walked through the bathroom with an expression I didn't recognize at first. It took me a moment to identify it as disapproval. "That must have cost a fortune," she said. "It was a fair price for the work," I told her. "Mom, you're not working anymore. Do you really need to be spending like this?" I looked at her for a moment. "It's my home, Karen. It needed updating." She smiled the way you smile at someone who doesn't quite understand. "I just think you need to be more careful. That's all. You have to think about the future." I let it go. I told myself she was still grieving. I told myself she was worried. I told myself that is what daughters do. Brian's version of concern was different. He started asking questions about the rental property. How much rent was I charging? Had I thought about selling it? Did I have a property manager? What were my plans for it long term? He was casual about it, the way you're casual when you've rehearsed the conversation in advance. He mentioned twice that he knew a real estate agent who could give me a market analysis. I didn't ask for one. About 7 months after Frank died, something happened that changed everything. I joined a grief support group at my church. There were 8 of us, people who had all lost spouses in the past 2 years. We met on Thursday evenings, and that is where I met a man named Philip. Philip was 69, a retired high school principal who had lost his wife to a stroke 18 months earlier. He was soft-spoken and funny and had a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying mattered. We started talking after group. Then we started having coffee after group. Then he asked me to dinner, and I said yes because I was tired of eating alone at my own kitchen table. I told Karen about Philip on a Sunday afternoon when she stopped by with the girls. I mentioned it lightly, the way you mentioned something pleasant, something that has brought a little warmth back into cold months. I didn't expect a celebration. I did not expect what I got. Her face went still in a way I'd seen only a handful of times. That particular stillness that means something is being calculated rather than felt. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. Her voice was careful. "About 6 weeks. We go to dinner, we take walks. It's nice. I enjoy his company." "Mom, it's been 7 months since Dad died." "Almost 8, I said. She looked at me like I had said something indecent. "Dad was the love of your life." He was. And Philip is a kind man who makes me laugh, and I haven't laughed much lately. "What do you actually know about him?" Karen asked. "Men like that, they go after widows, especially widows who own property. Philip is a retired principal with his own pension, his own home, and his own money. He has never once asked me about my finances." "That you know of," she said. "I want you to be careful. That was all. I'm just looking out for you." I appreciated that she was worried. I told myself that. But something about the conversation stayed with me in an uncomfortable way, like a pebble in a shoe that you keep adjusting around instead of removing. Brian called 2 days later. He'd clearly spoken with Karen. He was gentler about it, more strategic. "Mom, Karen mentioned you've been seeing someone from your grief group. I just want to make sure you're protecting yourself. You're in a vulnerable place right now." "I am doing very well, actually," I told him. I know. I just mean emotionally. Grief does things to us, makes us susceptible. I'm a retired nurse, Brian. I spent 30 years assessing patients' mental and emotional states. I think I can assess my own." He laughed a little. "Of course. I just love you, Mom." "I know," I said, but after I hung up, I sat with it. My children had managed, in the span of 1 week, to make me feel foolish about something that had made me genuinely happy for the first time in months. They hadn't forbidden anything. They hadn't threatened anything. Not yet. They'd just layered enough concern on top of it that enjoying it felt irresponsible. I kept seeing Philip. I kept it quieter. The requests for money started around the same time, which I notice now, even if I didn't connect it then. Karen needed help with her car payment. Just this once, she was between commissions. I gave her $600. Brian and Tanya were redoing their kitchen. Nothing extravagant. They just needed to cover the appliances. I gave them $1,500. Karen's older daughter needed new equipment for travel softball. $400. Brian's son needed tutoring over the summer. $350. None of it was ever called a loan. None of it was ever paid back. None of it was ever really discussed. It was just assumed that if Mom had it and they needed it, the money would flow in one direction. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. I told myself this was what families did. The thing that changed me, the thing that started the unraveling, happened on a Wednesday evening in November. Philip had invited me to a piano concert at the Civic Center and then to dinner at a restaurant I had always wanted to try. I bought a new dress. Not expensive, just something that made me feel like myself again, like the woman I had been before 14 months of hospitals and hospice and hollow mornings. I mentioned the evening to Karen when she called to check in. She went quiet in that particular way. A dress? How much did you spend? $65, Karen. And dinner? Those places aren't cheap, Mom. Philip is taking me to dinner. Her voice changed then, took on an edge I hadn't heard before. Mom, I really think you need to slow down with this man. You're spending money, you're buying things, you're getting emotionally attached to someone you barely know. You have grandchildren who are going to need things. College is coming. You should be thinking about that, not about dinner dates. I thought about what to say. I thought about saying it calmly. Then I thought about the $600 car payment and the $1,500 appliances and the softball equipment and the tutoring. And I said, Karen, you have never once suggested I slow down when you needed something. The silence on the phone was very loud. We'll talk when I come over Sunday, she said. Sunday turned into the meeting. They both arrived, Karen and Brian, without calling first. Tanya stayed home, which in hindsight was either consideration or strategy. They sat down in my living room and Brian put a folder on my coffee table. A folder? On my coffee table. Karen started talking. She had her professional voice on, the one she used for sales calls. They had been thinking. They were worried. They had spoken with a financial planner, someone Brian knew, not to interfere, just to understand what I was dealing with. Because at my age, with my situation, mistakes could be costly. What mistakes? I asked. The bathroom renovation, the spending on Philip, the rental property, which according to the financial planner was being managed inefficiently. I should be charging more rent or selling outright. The money sitting in savings accounts earning almost nothing when it should be invested more aggressively. I own the rental property. I bought it with your father. It provides income. I know what I'm doing with it. Brian leaned forward. Mom, we love you. We want to protect you. We've been talking and we think it would make sense for you to add us to your accounts, just as a backup, so that if anything ever happened, we could make sure things were handled properly. I looked at him. Add you to my accounts. Just a precaution. And the rental property? Karen and Brian exchanged a look that they probably thought I didn't catch. We think it would be worth looking at putting it in a shared trust. Something we could all manage together. Together, I said. It's a lot for one person, Karen said. You have a lot of decisions to make and you shouldn't have to make them alone. I have been making financial decisions alone since before either of you were born, I said. I have been making them since I was working double shifts while your father was getting his certification and we were living in a 2-bedroom apartment and stretching every single dollar. I made them fine then, and I make them fine now. Karen's voice went the direction I had been afraid it would go. Mom, you're not working anymore. Things are different. You're 67. You're lonely. You've become attached to a man you barely know. You're spending money without thinking about consequences, and we are trying to help you. Lonely. She said it the way you'd say a diagnosis. I'm not lonely, I said. I'm happy. That is the problem, isn't it? Brian stood up, trying to mediate. Nobody has a problem with you being happy, Mom. We just want to make sure. Look, we've done some research. There are senior financial advisors. There are estate planning attorneys. There are communities. Active senior communities. Tanya looked at some. Some of them are really lovely. You'd have people your own age. You'd have activities. I live on a street I've lived on for 31 years. I have a garden. I have a home. I have a life. Karen set her coffee cup down with more force than she intended. Mom, we are trying to help you, and you are making this very difficult. I asked them to leave. Brian looked hurt. Karen looked hardened. We'll give you some time, she said, standing. But we're going to need to come back to this. We're not dropping it. I told them that was fine. They could come back to it all they wanted. I was not signing anything. After the door closed, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. I looked at the counters Frank and I had picked out together. I looked at the window above the sink where I'd hung a small stained glass hummingbird that Frank gave me for our 20th anniversary. I looked at the house I had lived in, cleaned, repaired, decorated, and loved for 3 decades. And I understood what was happening. My children saw a house worth something. Retirement savings, a rental property generating monthly income, a life insurance payout sitting in a savings account. They saw an old woman who was lonely and emotional and making sentimental decisions with money that they had already, in some private corner of their thinking, begun to consider partly theirs. They weren't entirely wrong about the sentimental part, but they were very wrong about what that meant. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Margaret, and she handled Frank's estate after he died, and she is someone I trust completely. I told her everything. The meeting, the folder, the accounts, the rental property, the suggestion about senior communities. "Dorothy," she said, "this is a pattern I recognize. What you're describing is financial coercion. It starts with concern and it escalates. Do they have access to any of your accounts currently?" "Only the credit card. Karen has been an authorized user for about 5 years." She was quiet a moment. "Okay, here's what I want you to do." I went to her office the following afternoon and we spent 3 hours going through everything. My will, my beneficiary designations, my power of attorney, my accounts, the rental property deed, everything. The life insurance payout, $175,000, was sitting in a savings account. I moved it into an account in my name only, at a different bank, with no authorized users and 2 forms of identification required for any transaction or changes. The account at my primary bank, where I'd been keeping daily expenses, the one Karen and Brian had been pressuring me to add them to, I added a fraud alert and a verbal password that only I and Margaret knew. Any attempted changes would require my physical presence. My will had left everything in equal shares to Karen and Brian. I revised it. The house would go into a charitable remainder trust upon my death, with the proceeds benefiting a local women's resource center and a hospice organization, the one that had cared for Frank in his final weeks with such dignity and tenderness. The retirement accounts, I changed the beneficiary designations. The rental property I transferred into an irrevocable trust managed by Margaret, with income going to me for life, and the property itself going to charity upon my death. The grandchildren's college savings, a modest amount, I'd been setting aside separately, I kept intact and placed in a 529 managed by Margaret rather than either of my children. Margaret walked me through each document. "You understand," she said, "that once these are signed, your children will have no legal claim to these assets." "I understand. And you understand that the 529S for your grandchildren remain. You're not punishing them." "I know the difference between my grandchildren and my children's behavior," I told her. She nodded. Then there was the matter of the credit card. Karen had been an authorized user for 5 years. She used it for things that had started as necessities after her divorce and had quietly grown into regular household expenses, groceries sometimes, her gym membership, her older daughter's music lessons, which I had never exactly agreed to fund but had never exactly objected to either. Brian had asked to be added 2 years ago for what he called emergencies, and I had said yes because he was my son and I didn't know how to say no to the word emergency when it came from your child. I called the credit card company from Margaret's office parking lot. I removed both of them. Effective immediately. "The authorization is removed," the representative confirmed. "They will be unable to make any further charges." "Thank you," I said. I went home and made dinner and fed the 2 cats Frank and I had gotten right after his diagnosis because he'd always wanted cats and we'd always said someday, and someday had finally started meaning now. I sat on the back porch in the November cold and watched the sky go dark and felt something in my chest that was not grief, not anger, but something quieter and more solid. Resolve, maybe. Or just the feeling of having finally done what I should have done months ago. Karen's card declined the next morning at the grocery store. I know this because she called me 11 minutes after the store opened. "Mom, my card isn't working. The grocery store card?" "I know," I told her. "I removed you as an authorized user." A beat of silence. "What?" "It's my card, Karen. My account. I've removed your access." Her voice shifted immediately, going from confusion to something harder. "You can't just do that without telling me. I was in the middle of checking out. I had to leave my cart. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "What is happening with you? This is because of Sunday, isn't it? You're punishing us." "I'm not punishing you. I'm managing my own finances." "Mom, I have 2 kids. I used that card for she stopped. For your groceries. I finished for her. Which you have been purchasing on my card for approximately 3 years without ever offering to reimburse me or even acknowledge that I was paying for them. Another silence, longer. Brian's card was declined that same evening at a hardware store where he'd gone to buy materials for what he'd described to me as a small project around his house. I had never agreed to fund a project around his house. The credit card had been for emergencies. His definition of emergency, I had come to understand, was quite elastic. He called me from the parking lot, and he was less quiet about it than his sister. "Mom, what is going on? My card just got declined. I had $340 worth of stuff at the register. I removed your authorized user status." "Why?" His voice had an edge I hadn't heard him use with me before. "Because it's my card, Brian. My money. Is this about the meeting? Because we were just trying to help. I know what you were trying to do." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tanya is very upset. We've been relying on that." "I know you have," I said. That was the problem. He said something about talking more when we'd both calmed down. I told him I was very calm. He didn't have a good answer for that. The letters arrived 3 days later. I had written one to each of them, handwritten, 2 pages each, mailed certified mail with return receipt. I told them I loved them. I told them I knew they had loved their father. I told them that grief is difficult and that I had tried to give them the benefit of the doubt for as long as I honestly could. And then I told them what I had done and why I had done it. I told them that the house they had grown up in, the retirement money their father and I had saved dollar by careful dollar, the rental property we had sacrificed vacations and new cars to purchase, none of that had ever been their money. It had always been mine and Frank's, and now it was mine, and I had made arrangements accordingly. I told them that I was not leaving them nothing out of spite. I was leaving them nothing because they had shown me clearly that they did not see me as a person with a full life still left to live. They saw me as a source, and I would not fund the rest of my life being seen that way. I closed each letter the same way. "If you want your mother, you know where I am. I will always be here for that. But the money is no longer part of the conversation." Karen called an hour after her letter arrived. She was crying, real desperate crying, and underneath it, I could hear something she probably didn't mean to let through. Panic. "Mom, please, you can't have changed everything. What about the girls? Their 529 accounts are intact. Margaret manages them now. Your daughters will have money for college. But the house, Mom, this house is. It's my house, Karen. It was never yours. Dad would have wanted," she started. "Your father would have wanted me to be treated with respect in my own home," I said. "That is the one thing I am absolutely certain of." She cried harder. I sat with the sound of it and thought about all the times I had held her while she cried. In the hospital when she was born, and it was 2 a.m, and Frank had fallen asleep in the chair, and it was just me and this small, red-faced, furious creature who needed something that only I could give. I thought about the miscarriages, one at 11 weeks and one at 14, and how I'd sat with her through both of them. I thought about the night her marriage ended and she sat at the kitchen table, this very table, and couldn't stop shaking, and I'd made tea and held her hand and didn't say a single word for over an hour because sometimes that's all there is to do. I loved her. I love her. That never changed. But love is not the same thing as surrender. "Mom, I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry for the things I said. I'm sorry for how we acted." "I hear you," I told her. "We'll see." Brian's call was different. His voice was controlled, measured, the way it gets when he is angry and trying not to sound it. "This is an overreaction," he said. "We were just expressing concern. You were trying to take over my finances and put me in a senior community, Brian. We were offering options. I didn't ask for options. I have options. I am 67 years old, and I am in excellent health, and I am of sound mind, and if you ever have actual evidence to the contrary, you are welcome to bring it to my physician. In the meantime, I am going to continue living my life as I see fit." "You're going to regret this," he said quietly, "when something actually goes wrong and you need us. If something goes wrong, I'll call Margaret." He was quiet for a long moment. So that's it. That's it for the money, yes. As for my son, that has always been up to you. He didn't call back. The fallout came in stages. Tanya posted something on her social media about how painful it was to watch a parent change after loss, about how grief affects people in ways families don't always understand. Her friends left sympathetic comments. She hadn't mentioned me by name. She didn't need to. Karen's younger daughter, my 9-year-old granddaughter, called me a week later because she'd overheard her parents fighting and was scared. I drove over and took both girls out for ice cream and let them talk about anything they wanted except money, which turned out to be everything school, their friends, a book they were both reading, a movie they wanted to see. Kids are resilient when you give them a chance to be. Brian consulted a lawyer. I found out later through Margaret. The lawyer told him what Margaret had already told me. Everything was properly executed. Everything was legal. There was no case, not even a thin one. He apparently used the word airtight in a way that Brian found discouraging. That must have been a difficult conversation. About 3 weeks after the letters, something else happened. I called Philip. I had not spoken to him much in the past month, pulling back the way I always did when I sensed my children gathering. Old habit, the kind you develop when keeping peace, has been your job for decades. But I called him on a Tuesday morning and he answered on the second ring and said, "My name the way you say the name of someone you are genuinely glad to hear from." "I missed talking to you," I said. "I missed it too, Dorothy." I told him some of what had happened. Not everything, not yet, but enough. He listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. "Are you all right?" he asked when I finished. "I think I'm becoming all right," I told him, slowly. "That sounds about right," he said. We went back to Thursday dinners, then Friday walks. Then he started coming to church with me, which neither of us planned but both of us found we wanted. My Thursday grief group had become, somewhere in the past few months, less about grief and more about living. I noticed that change in myself before I named it. It has been 4 months now since I changed everything. Here is where things stand. Karen and I are rebuilding something. It is slow and it is careful, and some weeks it feels like laying individual bricks with long spaces between them. She came to dinner 2 Sundays ago, just her, without the girls, and we talked for 3 hours. She told me her therapist had asked her what she was most afraid of, and she had realized the answer was losing me. Not the money, but actually me, her mother, and that somewhere in the grief of losing her father she had confused the two. I believe her. I think grief does that. I also think that is not a complete explanation, but it is a real part of one, and that is something to work with. Brian has not called. Tanya sent me a text in December that read, "Hope you're well." I read it a few times, trying to understand what it was asking for or offering, and eventually concluded it was neither. I sent back, "Thank you, take care," and left it there. My son is out there. I know where he lives. I know his phone number. I know his voice. And I love him with all the tired, complicated, unshakable love of a mother who has known someone since before they knew themselves. But I cannot want his love more than I want my own dignity. I have learned that the hard way, and I am keeping the lesson. The rental property is mine. The house is mine. The money is mine. I made it. Frank and I made it, and we made it for our retirement, not for our children's renovations. I am taking a trip in the spring. 7 days in Charleston, just across the state line, because I have always loved it. And Frank and I always talked about spending real time there and not just driving through. Philip is coming. We booked it on a Tuesday morning over coffee at my kitchen table, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I bought a new dress for the trip already. It cost $82, and I don't feel a single moment of guilt about it. My name is Dorothy Caldwell. I am 67 years old, and I am a retired nurse and a widow and a mother and a grandmother and a woman who tends a garden and feeds 2 cats named after jazz musicians and falls asleep to old movies and wakes up every morning in a house she loves in a life she is choosing for herself, one day at a time. I am not old. I am not fragile. I am not confused or lonely or incapable or past the age where my feelings and choices matter. I am not quiet. To anyone watching this who has a child or a sibling or a relative circling them like they're already in a state to be settled, hear me. You are allowed to live. You are allowed to spend your own money on your own life. You are allowed to fall in love again. You are allowed to travel, to remodel your bathroom, to buy a dress, to laugh at dinner with someone kind. You are allowed to say no to people who love your resources more than they love you. You are allowed to protect yourself even when the people you're protecting yourself from are the ones you love most. And if they come back, really come back, not for what you have but for who you are, leave the door open. People can change. Some of them do. But the door to your finances? Lock it. Know where every key is and keep them in your own pocket. That choice is always yours to make.